If you cannot imagine what it's like to be the child of a narcissistic mother, count yourself blessed. For four boys, Brandon 14, Austin 7, Brigham 6, and Matthew 4, having such a mother would end with their horrific deaths on October 26, 1997. Because Mummy was mad. Because Mummy wanted to hurt other people. They would pay the price. The boys were living with their mother, Susan Eubanks, and her boyfriend, Renee Dodson, and their cousin in a small home in San Marcos, California. Dodson wasn't father to any of the children in the house. Brandon's dad was John Armstrong, Austin's dad was Larry Shoebridge, and Brigham and Matthew's dad was Eric Eubanks, all of whom ended their relationships with Eubanks. When Eubanks's brother died, she also got custody of her nephew, Aaron, who was just 6 years old. Now, Eubanks hated that the fathers of her children left her. Her marriage to Eric Eubanks started out pretty stable. However, after a surgery she needed to have, Eubanks started abusing prescription medication and alcohol. She lost her job, and she and Eric began to separate and reconcile in cycles. About a month before the murders, Eric finally moved out for good, and the couple were filing for divorce. She'd also been having an on-again, off-again relationship with Renee Dodson. Eric moved out, Dodson moved in. This cycled as well in the months leading up to October 26th. Eric out, Dodson in. Dodson out, Eric in. The relationship with both men was anything but stable at that point. At some point around October 16th, with Dodson out, Eubanks went to a store and bought replacement deadbolt locks for her house. She seemed angry, according to the clerk at the store who knew Dodson. She told the clerk that Dodson broke the lock on her door and that she was replacing all the locks so that he couldn't get in to get his stuff. She then said something foreboding to the clerk to warn Dodson that she just purchased ammunition and that one of the bullets had his name on it. Heartbreakingly, she then turned to one of her younger sons and said, quote, "Mommy did buy the bullets, didn't she? Didn't she?" End quote. Horrific. Threats weren't new for Eubanks. According to Dodson, she would talk about killing herself and the kids when she was angry in the past. 10 days later, things might have smoothed out a little between the pair. They left Brandon at home to watch the other kids and went off that afternoon to watch football at a bar. They had a pitcher of beer. She became upset about another woman in the bar that she didn't like, so off they go to a different bar. They would argue in the car, though, and Eubanks slapped Dodson a few times while he was driving, so he drove home. They were on a freeway off-ramp when Eubanks slammed the minivan they were driving into park. She then pulled the keys from the ignition. Dodson got the keys back and continued to drive home, where they continued to argue. Dodson said he was going to leave and move to Hawaii. Eubanks slapped him again, took his keys, blocked him from leaving the room, and ripped the telephones out of the wall. This was just incredibly abusive and toxic. Then they calmed down and they had sex. He told Eubanks he was going to go watch some television, and instead he just fled the house. He called the sheriffs from a gas station and asked them to come with him back to the house so that he could get his things and leave. So during all this fighting, Brandon actually also left and called the mother of a friend of his. He asked her to come get him and the boys because they were scared. She told him, go home, reassess, and call back if he still wanted her to come and pick them up. And he did, begging the friend's mother to come and get them. The mother spoke to Eubanks, who seemed upset and agitated, and agreed to come pick up the boys, but she never did. Eric was staying at her house while he got on his feet, and the mother did not want to aggravate Eubanks by taking the boys to where Eric was. Eubanks' aggression and anger prevented her boys from having a safe place to turn. A sheriff's deputy picked up Dodson at the gas station, and as they drove up to Eubanks' house, Eubanks was carrying Dodson's tools away from his vehicle. The vehicle now had 2 flat tires and broken headlights. The deputy told Eubanks to drop the tools, and she became confrontational. She claimed Dodson owed her money and that he raped her. She finally went inside when the deputy threatened arrest, but she would come out again. She was yelling that men screwed her whole life. She claimed to have been beaten and raped. The deputy leaves with Dodson, and he notices that Eric was parked nearby. The mother that Brendan turned to had paged Eric and let him know about the phone calls. Eric was coming in to check on the kids. He sees the deputy's car, and he was just waiting for him to leave because Eubanks had a restraining order against him, and he didn't want to have a problem. So Eric agreed to take Dodson away from the scene. They transferred his property to Eric's vehicle and leave. Inside the house, Eubanks called John, who is Brandon's father, and wanted him to tell Brandon to lie to police to take her side in the whole argument so that the boys wouldn't be taken by Child Protective Services. And boy, did they need to be taken by Child Protective Services in just this swimming in this toxic environment that these poor kids were in. Eric also gets a voicemail from Eubanks, who's clearly off the rails at this point, that just says, say goodbye. Eric calls the sheriff at about 6:30 p.m. and asks for the deputy that was at the house earlier to call him. He does around 7 p.m. Eric was told to call and request a welfare check on the house. So he did that, and deputies would arrive to conduct that check around 7:30 p.m. At some point, she gave the youngest two children, Brigham and Matthew, some Xanax. She herself had taken Valium during the hours before. Then in the living room, she shot Brandon twice at close range. She went into her son's bedroom, and there she shot Austin, reloading after missing Matthew twice. And then she shot Brigham twice, and then Matthew. She fired other shots in the room, into the wall and a window. She removed the casings, threw them into a trash can, and reloaded some more. And then she shot herself in the abdomen, because they always give themselves some sort of non-fatal wound that's far less severe. When responders found her nephew, who wasn't harmed physically, he was in bed with the blankets pulled all the way up to his chin, and I can only imagine how terrified that poor kid would be. The youngest child, Matthew, was still alive, but he would later die in the hospital. Eubanks would survive. They also found notes, 5 of them, and they were disturbing, so deeply disturbing. She wrote to Eric, who was father to Brigham and Matthew, "You betrayed me. You kept a diary, and you and Renee Dodson conspired against me. I've lost everyone I've ever loved. Now it's time for you to do the same." She told him to take her workers' disability money to bury the children and find your rainbow, whatever the hell that meant. Another note to the boyfriend who left her, she wrote, "The biggest liar to date that I know. Stay on crystal meth and let your 37-year-old ass move back with mom and dad." It was signed off with "See ya, haha." To John, who was Brandon's dad, she wrote, "I know you'll hate me forever, but I can't let Brandon," who she was referring to, "live without his brother, so I did what I did." She said Dodson effed her all up and that she was tired of all the fight and the hurt. The other letters were for her niece and her sister. She told the sister she wanted to be buried in the same casket as Matthew. Police also found more than 50 bottles of prescription medication in the defendant's house after the murders. Eubanks was tried, and Eubanks was convicted. She was sentenced to death. She appealed and lost the appeal, but it's California, and California has had suspensions and moratoriums on their death penalty for decades. She has been housed in prison waiting, and she's 60 now. In 2020, she and a number of other infamous killers were named in a massive EDD fraud by some 35,000 inmates who were attempting to collect unemployment insurance benefits. Others included Scott Peterson, who killed his wife and unborn child, Carrie Stainer, who's a serial killer, Soro Guerre, who is just a horrific child killer, and Wesley Shermantine, who was one of the 2 speed freak killers. Some 20,000 of the claims were paid before the fraud was caught and stopped. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying these videos and you want to see more, please click the subscribe button and hit those notifications so that you don't miss any uploads. We appreciate you. Thanks.